Hello, hello.
So, evening everybody, and welcome to the first Northwest Regional MACP educational event. So I'm Charlotte Williams, I'm the regional rep, and hopefully this is the first of many opportunities, good practice, and hopefully at some point in the future actually meet in person. So the format of this evening, we'll begin firstly with Bill Campbell, who's the Director of Capacity Development for NHS R&D in the North West. So he's going to talk to us and share with us opportunities, how we can become more research active in our clinical roles, and also explore clinical research career pathways as well. And following Bill, we've got Jill Thomas, who's an elbow and shoulder specialist physio, national and international lecturer, and many other accolades. And Jill, is going to share with us her journey from being a clinical specialist physio to a clinical researcher. And I assure you, you won't leave here this evening without feeling inspired and enthused to go back to your day-to-day clinical jobs and seek out those research activity opportunities. And we were talking before you all arrived about how unplanned, but how fortuitous it's been that we're actually doing this event this evening, following on from the launch of the AHP Research and Innovation Strategy by Health Education England this morning. So I don't know whether any of you managed to tap into that, but it is available as a recording on their website. But it just shows how, I suppose, relevant and pertinent this space and part of our role is, and how important it is at the minute. And it's really exciting in terms of our future opportunities as AHPs. And it's certainly part of the MACP strategic plan as well, to support and increase research activity with their members. So as David said, please feel free to pop questions in the chat. I will collect those together and present them to Bill and Jill after they've finished doing their presentations, and hopefully we can generate some really good discussions at the end in the Q&A session. So I'll hand over to Bill firstly. So I'll just get your screen slides up. Bear with me. Give me 2 secs. Oh. Okay, hopefully you can all see the slides. If not, if you could just pop it in the chat, that'd be really useful. So I presume you can all see. Yeah, thank you. So Bill, off you go. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Charlotte. Well, good evening from me. And I was going to say it's really lovely to see you all, but I can't. But in my head, I can. So thank you for giving up the time tonight to come and listen to us and to listen to me talking about the different opportunities that may be available to you if you want to develop a research or a clinical academic career. And one of the ways of beginning to introduce you to what might be available is to look at what quite a lot of people call the kind of gold standard awards, which are the NIHR awards for fellowships that may be available to you and of interest to you. What I'm quite excited about with you, giving up your time this evening to come and do this is already you're telling us that you're curious about research. And that's got to be a very important starting point, because it's quite a challenging journey if you want to embark on it, but it can be a very, very rewarding one at the same time. So I'm just going to talk you through some of the opportunities that are available, and in doing that I'll raise a few points as well about kind of what these journeys are like from the experience that I have of working with early career researchers. largely across, but not exclusively, largely across the NHS, some of them are in local authorities. And I think if you look at the slide that's in front of you now, if you could pay attention to the two areas that are kind of circled or surrounded by the yellow line there, fellowships for all, and then the healthcare professionals fellowships. If in the professional roles that you have, if you're interested in a research career, then it is possible to combine practice and hold on to practice, keep one foot in practice, but also develop a career role alongside it. And this is where I get really kind of excited about this, because really the real attraction of that is that if people want to develop what's called a clinical academic career, where you do that, one foot in practice and one foot in research, it means that there's an opportunity for people to look at the questions that need to be asked, that you see in practice, that you think are worthy of investigation. So you'll be aware of all the kind of mantra that goes around about evidence-based practice, evidence-based practice. Well, we're emphasizing from NHS R&D North West and lots of other places as well, is instead of evidence-based practice, we're really encouraging people like yourselves who are the experts to go and to think in terms of practice-based evidence, to almost turn that on its head. So we're saying, we believe with the right kind of encouragement and the right kind of support and the right kind of nurturing, you will know what questions need to be asked. Questions like, why do we keep doing this way? How do we make service delivery better? How can we improve health and well-being? Whatever it is that's of importance to you. You may not know how to ask the questions, and you may not know how to go about it. And that's what some of these fellowships are about, to help you to develop the skills to do that. But you're ideally placed, and there's a whole pool of talent out there, and you are that pool of talent that NIHR and the NHS wants to tap into. They want to support you. That doesn't mean it's an easy journey, it's not. But the starting point is, the talent is there. And people like me and where I work, we see ourselves as kind of trying to nurture that talent, making a contribution to help people to develop their own research careers and clinical academic careers. If you look at the two pathways there, the fellowships for all pathways is awarded by the NIHR. These can attract substantial amounts of money to support your research career. But the ones that are in green there, fellowships for all, have been available for some time, and historically they've been kind of mopped up by doctors and dentists. But it is still possible for people from nursing, midwifery and the allied health professions, and therefore physiotherapy, to apply for one of those to develop a research career. And even within that, there's an opportunity to still maintain a kind of some degree of involvement in practice whilst you're doing that. But the other pathway, the ones that's in pink or red or whatever the colour it's showing up there, the healthcare professionals pathway, it's not available to doctors and dentists. This is the one that's been developed relatively recently, exclusively for people who want to develop clinical academic careers. And that means that they maintain at least 20% as they develop their clinical academic career. They can continue to, with at least 20% of their working lives in practice, but then the rest of the time they develop themselves as a researcher. I've kind of got to hold my hand up now and say, I'm talking here about all these fellowships and all these awards that may be available to you. And some of these can be very substantial amounts of money. If you were to develop a clinical academic career, the ultimate kind of goal is not for you to get a doctoral level qualification or a postdoctoral level qualification or a professorship or whatever. The ultimate goal, as far as NIHR is concerned, is to develop the talent yourselves, who eventually will be making a difference. So what they're really interested in, what difference will you make some years down the road, down the pathway that you're following? So they're basically saying they're really looking at developing leaders, research leaders. And one of the expressions that's quite often used is, just think in terms of what king or queen do you want to become? And they ask you those sorts of questions if you apply for fellowships. They want to know where do you want to go with this? What difference do you want to make? Where do you want to stand in this, and why? And so when you start looking at this, it looks like a nice little kind of linear pathway that you apply to the NIHR when you've got a couple of years experience in your clinical roles. You can apply for a master's level award from them, which is the pre-doctoral award that's identified there. And then you go, when you've completed that, you've got a little bit more experience. So not only are you developing your researcher skills as far as NIHR is concerned, you're also developing your clinical skills, your practice skills as well alongside those. The more advanced you become, the more that turns into leadership rather than just kind of patient-facing work. But it isn't a linear path. And if there were people from the NIHR here, they would be saying, it's quite acceptable and it's quite legitimate, it's quite normal for people to do one of our awards, like the pre-doctoral clinical academic fellowship, and then step off this pathway and go and do something else. So they may be then sponsored to do a PhD somewhere else through a charity, or even self-funded, or by their employers, by their trusts. But then at some point, they may want to come back into the program at clinical lectureship level or another level, to rejoin it. So I've been misleading you if I said, think in terms of the training, the research training awards as being ones whereby you start at one end and you progress over time through to the other end. It's not like that. And some people don't necessarily want to go as far as possible. So in terms of these awards, NIHR would say, think big, think long term, but we would be saying, but think incrementally. Take one step at a time. Life gets in the way, you have other priorities, so it's acceptable and it's understandable that people are not rushing through the development of research careers through either the Ica program, which is the one that's described in pink there, or the Fellowships for All program. But they are the ones primarily that we focus upon when we try to support people, clinicians to develop clinical academic careers, and it's the ones in red primarily. Can we have a look at the next slide, Charlotte, please? This is the Ica scheme that I've just referred to there. It is also true that it's a shallow pyramid. So I've been misleading you if I said lots of people kind of apply for PhD studentships, fellowships from funded by the NIHR, and then they just kind of, more and more of them, they just progress up very, very quickly. They don't. And even below the level of a PhD, the bar is very high. So to even secure one of the pre-doctoral awards from the NIHR is a major achievement. And we would be saying, the task for yourselves is, the starting point is, we know that you have the talent. We know that you are the people with the right sort of encouragement, the right kind of support, will develop the researcher skills, will research aspects of practice that you know about that are important. But we're saying that in doing that, you've got to make yourself irresistible. So if you want to apply for one of these awards within the Ica program at any level, we would be saying, what have you got in the bag that shows the NIHR that they would spend public money on you and not on someone else? So how can you make yourself irresistible? How can you make yourself someone that the NIHR say, we need to invest in her because she will make a difference? And it might be 5 years down the road, it might be longer. So if you're thinking in terms of applying to NIHR as funding for a PhD, or funding for a research master's degree, or funding for postdoctoral level, the answer is they wouldn't be interested in you. They would see that almost as a vehicle. So they would say, yes, the project is very important that you're proposing to undertake, but it's only one part of the journey. They'd be saying, what development of you are you going, I'll be coming back to this in a few minutes' time, what aspect of you are you going to develop as you go forward? When you think of the filtration rate, the number of people that kind of drop off, people like me don't think of it as a kind of failure when people step out of this. There's a recognition that some people see, well, for now, that's as far as I want to go, or I've got lots of, pressures at home, or I've got other priorities. We've had 2 years of uncertainty that we've had now. And so when people step out of this pathway, it's not necessarily a failure, because people may go into other areas of work. They may even pursue a research interest that goes down a cul-de-sac. It doesn't go where you thought it might go. But at the same time, we say, well, that doesn't mean you stop at the end of the cul-de-sac. We'd say, get out of it and start again and move into a different direction. But there is a recognition that if you want to secure funding through this scheme, the Ica scheme, accept that you have to make yourself irresistible. And that kind of comes from being able to demonstrate to the NIHR that you're not just curious about research, but that you've been doing things. They can be very modest. They could be things that you're doing within the trust. They could, you may run journal clubs. You may have got involved in an ethics committee in the R&D. You may have piggybacked onto someone else's research project just for observational purposes. They're all sending the messages of this is someone who is committed to research and recognizes the importance of research into practice. Can we move on now? Charlotte, please. So these are those two major areas of opportunity for you if you wish to pursue them. The ones in pink, or it looks more red on my screen here, are the ones that are probably going to be most attractive to you, but not necessarily. And in order to become eligible for them, you have to be registered with one of the professions that they recognize. Well, you clearly will, most people here clearly will be. Am I right in thinking, Charlotte, there could be people on the webinar who are not employed by the NHS, they may be employed in other organizations?
Possibly. MACP members aren't just kind of working in the National Health Service, so there could be people who work in privately, but I'm not sure of the specifics of those that are on tonight. So yeah.
In terms of eligibility, one criterion is you must be registered with an eligible profession, but then beyond that, there is then the eligibility issue of where do you work. So people can work outside of the NHS and apply for these awards, but they have to be working in organisations with a particular characteristic, namely that 50% of the work of the organisation is delivered free at the point of delivery. So wherever you've got a query or an uncertainty about whether you'd be eligible for one of these awards, we would say contact the Academy, the NIHR Academy, and ask them, because they're very, very helpful, and they would explain to you not just about whether the profession you're linked with is appropriate, which it will be. They'd also want to know a little bit more about the organisation. They'd also want know a little bit more about you and how much of your time you're spending delivering services that are free at the point of delivery. So you can check that out. So, and it's quite easy to do that, and you can just send them an email. And if you look at the Academy's website, I think we've got the reference to it at the end of these slides. That will be a useful way forward for you. So you can work in outside organisations, a hospice, local authority, social enterprise, provided there is that criterion that are met of 50% of the service being delivered free at the point of delivery. But it's always worth checking that out with NIHR. The key difference between these two programs, these two fellowship programs, is the Ica program. That's what integrated clinical academic means. Ica program is that for those people, this is designed specifically to exclude medics and dentists, but to support people who are practitioners who want to engage in research into practice, to support, to ask questions about practice that in due course will make a difference. It's almost like, doing something in a modest way, but something that's significant. So you can kind of add to the jigsaw of understanding one small piece. So you build in the jigsaw that everyone's researching into, you're making your small contribution, And of course, you become part of a network, you become part of a bigger community of researchers, clinical academic researchers and beyond. And that becomes kind of nurturing and supportive and encouraging in and of itself, because the more you network and don't feel as though you're alone, then the better the prospects of maintaining a clinical academic career and learning from others as well. So there's all sorts of benefits around that. So can we move on to the next one, Charlotte, please? One of the issues that's quite often raised with us is that when people are thinking of applying for fellowships, it could be a fellowship from a charity, not even the NIHR. Quite often they think, you know, if you have a conversation with someone, you say, what's your area of interest? What do you want to research into? And sometimes you get very broad statements, say, well, I want a PhD. Well, that's not the starting point. They'd be very much looking at, yes, but a PhD in what? To do what? What kind of difference? If you were to look to the NIHR, or if you look to any charities, you will find that they will make statements of what are the priorities for them. If you want funding from your trust, and it could be a small amount of funding from the trust of just, can I apply for a £2,000 grant to do some work? If you locate that piece of that request in the context of what are the priorities of the trust, what are the priorities of the profession, what are the NHS priorities, what about the NHS long-term plan, all those sorts of things help you to strengthen your argument for securing funding to take your career forward. And you know, it's probably quite a useful point for me to say, if you can secure a £1,000 award from within your trust, it goes on your CV. It's an example of you put the effort into a competitive situation, you secured that funding to undertake an audit or to undertake a small piece of research or to do whatever. It tells the reader of any application you make, this is someone who's committed, who's raised her head or his head above the parapet, and is recognizing that the research world is challenging, but is in the right direction. It's because they always want to invest in people who will complete. And the more evidence you have of completing things that you started and one kind of awards of one sort or another, the better for you. It's all about building that, making yourself irresistible. So for example, with the NIHR, when you look at the project, they will be saying, you know, what are the areas of greatest needs, aging, obesity, and so on. You don't need to spend any time reading that. We'll just be thinking, just from your point of view as potential future researchers, clinical academics, we would be saying, wherever you're going to secure or apply for funding from, have a look at what their priorities are. Then the last bit on the page there for me is the Gantt charts, to sit down and say to yourself, what's my career trajectory going to look like? What do I want to do over the next 5 years? At what pace? At what angle? Is this going to be a steep learning curve? Or am I really going to commit myself to this and work at the weekends and work in the evenings? Is that? And so for some people, yes. For other people, they say, I want to do this in an incremental way, starting with whatever level you're at now, building on a little bit more on top of that, and then more on top of that, and so on. But the ultimate goal is always to make yourself irresistible, to undertake research, to develop your researcher skills and your clinical skills to ultimately make a difference. And if there isn't a make a difference at the end of it, you're unlikely or less likely to be supported. But if we had a speaker from the NIHR here now, they'd be saying, we want to support you, we want to fund you, and they do. They really do recognize that the talent is out there. It is yourselves, but they're saying, think in terms of thinking big, thinking making a difference. And what journey do you plan to undertake? A little Gantt chart can help you with that, with the planning of the journey, something that you might want to do for yourself. You could even sit down around a coffee table with a friend or family member and explain your career plans. And you'll probably find that somebody would say, in terms of your research career plans, I mean, they'd probably say to you, oh, so you want to do that at some point. Your friend or member of the family is going to say, why? And you need to be able to answer why. Why do I want to do this? And this recognizing the areas of greatest needs and preferences, a very important part of being able to answer that question. So your project is only one part of the development of a clinical academic career. Can we move on, Charlotte? And that's the bit here that we're coming to now, is that within your research career, there would be an expectation if you apply to the NIHR that you would have a host and a partner organization. So basically, if you were within the NHS or in one of the other organizations, a hospice, a charity or a local authority, that might be the host organization that would receive money on your behalf from the NIHR if you applied and were successful for one of their awards. And they would receive the money that would then be distributed out to you. The partner organization would be the higher education institution, the HEI, the university that you'd be linking with, that would help you to deliver on the project that you've put together and that NIHR have said, yes, we want to invest in this, we support this. So it's very important that, and it can be either way around. Usually the host organization is your employer and the HE is the other, is the partner organization. But again, that can be, you can get more advice on that from the NIHR themselves. They would give you guidance, as would the universities that are familiar with this. But that leads you to the next point on this bullet point here, which for me is crucial. You may have heard of this expression, person, place, project. So there are three elements to developing you as a clinical academic. So they'd be saying, what do we know about you? And what I've been kind of hammering home is, go away from tonight thinking, I wouldn't be doing the kind of job I'm doing now if I wasn't able. We know that, they know that, people who want to fund you, whether they're charities or whether they're NHR or whether it's your own trust. But it's your job, it's your responsibility as a person to make yourself irresistible. And the more you can provide evidence of, yes, I am committed to research. Yes, I am curious about it. Yes, I've got some things in the bag and they may be very modest, but they are in and of themselves important. So think in terms of selling yourself. I'll move on to project before I talk about place. The next bit is the project. If you're applying for funding from the NIHR or any of the other organizations, they're not simply interested in providing funding for you to undertake a higher degree of one sort or another, or to fund a research project of its postdoctoral level that you want to undertake. They're only interested in that if they're seen as a vehicle towards something else, the something else being making a difference. The place is, where would you undertake this research? The NIHR will be saying to you, surround yourself with the best people, not the people that you know most. They may not be the best people. And so you may have some contacts with people, for example, who could be supervisors of a master's degree by research or a doctoral level qualification. And you might, well, I know them well, and they'd be happy to work with me. You've got to be kind of quite selfish, really, and say to yourself, well, for my particular project that I want to take forward, are these the best people for me to be with? Or is somebody doing some cutting edge work somewhere else that I ought to be working with? Or if they are the right people, do I need to bring some other people in to strengthen my team? So the expression that's often used, and it's within the charities as well as NIHR, it would be surround yourself with the best people, the people who will help you to develop your own research career, your clinical academic career. And that takes you to the training element of this. There is an expectation, and it's funded, certainly from the NIHR, that you would have a training plan. So if you received funding for any one of their awards, they'd expect you to be able to answer, what training would you want to undertake in order to deliver the project, to progress your research career step by step with the ultimate goal of making a difference. And for example, they don't look very positively at people who say, well, I come from a scientific background and I'm kind of interested in mixed methods, so I'd want to go and do a qualitative research methods course. They would look at that and say, that's far too general. They would be saying, given your project, what aspects of mixed methods research training would you want to undertake and why? So everything would be linked back to your development in terms of the skills that you have currently, the skills that you want to develop, but all of those skills in relation to the project, the research trajectory, the direction of travel, ultimately you're the king or the queen that you want to become. And so it takes you down to, if you were asked, if someone said to you, what's your unique selling point? Why should any one of these organizations invest in you? And to respond to that, we would say, because I'm special, because I have got research experience at the moment, but I want to build on it. I'm resilient. I will network, I've got evidence of being resilient. I'm happy to network. I've got evidence of being involved and developing networks. Evidence, 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 wherever you can, that makes you irresistible, identifies your offer. And then the 5-year goal bit is that if you think of funding for projects, for qualifications of one sort or another, or postdoctoral, as being vehicles for development as much as the importance of the project themselves. The projects are very, 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 very important. But at the end of your PhD, it's not a Nobel Prize that you're looking for. You'd be looking at, what's the next gentle step forward that I'd want to take from there? So there would be an expectation that you have at least a 5-year kind of plan, but in recognition that life gets in the way, and that sometimes you might park your research career and come back later when you feel better, or when the work pressures are less, or when other things that interfere with just what happens. That's the real world, and they acknowledge that. If you want a clinical academic career, NIHR will be saying to you, don't just think of your researcher skills training, the intellectual, the academic skills that you need to undertake research. They'll be saying, think of your clinical skills development as well, because they go hand in hand. It isn't one or the other. You do both within a clinical academic career. And so when you're thinking of your 5-year goals, just in terms of clinical practice, is there an aspect of this that I need to develop? But you need to develop it in relation to the research trajectory, not just something you're interested in that's not related to your project. It will be related to your project, because together, that's what makes you special. When we say, well, why me? Why am I the person to come to about this area of research? Because you develop the clinical skills and the research skills in order to understand that more fully and keep making your little pieces in the jigsaw, the scientific jigsaw, to build it up to get this greater understanding of whatever the area is that's of interest and that you're passionate about. And this bit about being in the best place with the best people and the best support, yeah, that's necessary. And that doesn't mean that you can't work with people that you've known for some time, but you need to be able to answer those questions yourself. If someone asks them, you ask yourself, or someone asks you, how do you know you're surrounding yourself with the best support? So they would be saying to you, if it was NIHR, they'd be saying things like, how do you know that this is the best supervision team? Or if you've got an advisor here, they may say to you things like, there are no restrictions on where you might seek this support. They might say, there's somebody down in UCL who is already researching into this area. Are you in contact with this person? Well, you kind of anticipate that by saying, I've already done that. And this is where I'm up to in relation to that. So building an application for one of these gold standard awards like NIHR can take you 18 months, but that's a developmental process itself. It's not something that should feel burdensome. It's something that you should feel, yeah, gives me time to think this through and to take my thinking in a more systematic way forward. So the last point, it is a long haul and you do need to plan long term, but the returns can be very, very significant. and you can maximize those returns. And that takes me to a very important point, the conversation with your employer. If you're developing a clinical academic career, it's not something to do without reference to your employer. You really need your employer on board from the outset, because NIHR would be saying, if we invest in you, all this public money, is your employer investing in you as well? And if the answer is, well, I don't know, they'd be saying, well, you ought to know, because they'd be saying, if you go to doctoral level and postdoctoral level in your 5-year plan and beyond, they'd be saying, we know the trusts can't commit themselves to new roles for you, but they can commit themselves to an intention to use the new developing skills and insights that you're developing as a researcher as you go through your doctoral level qualifications or master's degree level qualifications and beyond. And so they would be saying, have you had a conversation with your employer about what you will put back into the trust if you're invested in? If we invest in you, if the NIHR invests in you, or a charitable organization invests in you. So it's a bit like not what everyone can do for you, but what can you put back? And that you can, how can the service improve? How can, any aspect of whatever it is that's important to you be brought into the employing organization, the organization where you work. Do we have another slide, or is that it there, Charlotte? I'm not sure.
I think this is your last slide, Bill, but just a minute or two, and then we'll move on to Jill. Otherwise, we'll run over. Thank you.
Well, all right. That's just very, very briefly, really. If you're not certain about how to take things forward in terms of eligibility for NIHR awards, the place to go is the Academy. You just look at the website, based in Leeds, and they are really, really helpful to explain to you what you're eligible to apply for, what would be the best step forward for you to apply for. Organizations such as the one I work for, does the same thing. You can contact MSK North West for guidance. We would tend to say if we don't know, then we'll probably know someone who does, and we'd want to point you in that direction. But what my message from me today is that all of these organizations that are providing substantial amounts of money are doing it for a reason. They know that the talent is out there, and there are people like yourselves, and they are saying, if we can nurture, if we can encourage, if we can help to develop you, you will address the questions that are important, and questions we don't even know about, or many people don't know about at the moment. Ultimately, to make a difference. That's the goal, to make a difference and to improve health, well-being, and so forth. And it's the kind of expression that I'm feel comfortable with and hear quite a lot in the kind of background I have is, we're trying to help to grow your own genius. And that's probably the point at which to stop.
Thanks so much, Bill. That was great. There is just one question that I think you have answered already about are the programs accessible to those not working in the NHS? Someone's put it in anonymously. So if there's any more detail that you'd like that Bill hasn't already explained, then you just pop it in the chat and I can direct it to you at the end, if that's okay, Bill, after Jill's done her bit.
Yeah,
thank you so much. Over to you, Jill.
Thank you, Charlotte. Let me just try and share my screen. Bear with. Get that set, play from the start. Right, can you see that?
Yep.
Yep, on there. Thanks for that, Bill. That was really inspiring, actually, and lots of food for thought there for me. Thank you to Charlotte and David, if you're still listening, for the invite to come and talk this evening. I know you wanted me to talk about kind of my journey into research. But I think from my perspective, what I want to do for you is to provide an insight into being involved in research alongside clinical practice and demonstrate that it is possible to do that on quite, I suppose, an informal level. I demonstrate that you can keep it simple and it is easy to get involved. So I'm talking of kind of before those really early stages. I'm in the early stages of my research career, if you like. So the early stages before Bill's side. So introduction to me, well, I'm predominantly a clinician, and I am involved in research, and I'm also an educator. I do lots of teaching, shoulder and elbow generally. So writing this talk for this evening was quite, I suppose, opening my eyes into what I do, because it's not the type of talk that I've ever done before. I'm usually talking shoulders or elbows. So I suppose I've gone on a journey writing the talk myself. I'm also a wife, a mum to two boys that may walk through the door at any moment, and I am also a non-clinical director and practice manager of a vet practice, quite slightly randomly. And really it's important to realise that we do hold a lot of hats, and we have lots of different roles. And I think sometimes when we listen to people speak or look on social media, you think that they invest their whole life into this wonderful bubble of learning about everything there is to know about, you know, the ankle or whatever joint. But actually we have to be realistic with ourselves, as Bill was touching on there, as to what we can achieve in the timescales that it takes, because we have lots of other things going on in our lives, and it is a balance. So what I'm definitely not a highbrow PhD researcher. I'm not a physio that claims to know everything about research, because I certainly don't. I'm not a statistician, and I'm not an author with a high impact factor. I am basically just a physio who happily stumbled into research and is quite enjoying it. So why am I a researching clinician? Good question. Well, I evaluate practice. I try to develop service and develop how we care for patients, in particular shoulder and elbow. I'm involved in a lot of audit. I ask questions, and I like trying to answer clinical questions, which usually poses more questions. And how I do that, I'm co-authored papers and book chapters. I've got some ongoing projects at the moment and some new studies in the pipeline. I'm a co-applicant on an NIHR funded trial, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And I'm also a co-author on another RCT that we're currently recruiting called the City Trial, which I'll come on to. So the road to research is a bumpy and windy one, and I'm not sure if anybody ever gets to the end of the road. It's a journey, as we all like to talk about. So again, I'm hopefully tying in well with Bill tonight, so I didn't know what Bill was actually talking about. Influences is the name of the day, isn't it? Everybody talks about influences. Well, I've had lots of influences in my career. And people way back from kind of clinical educators at university and universities lecturers such as Janet at Liverpool way back many centuries ago, through to my current colleagues. And some of those are local and colleagues that I work with on a day-to-day basis. Some are nationally colleagues and some international colleagues on there as well. People that have given me little bits of thoughts, people who have enjoyed just discussing what I do with, and who have inspired me. So these are people who I've definitely learned a lot from and who have influenced my practice. So my journey so far, I was one of those that really enjoyed doing dissertation at undergrad level, and thought actually I probably would quite like research at some point. And moving on to that, just the questioning and reflecting on clinical practice, what we do day to day, not just taking for granted that somebody tells you to do this and it seems to work, so we'll just carry on doing it. And then at a local level, being involved in service developments and audit projects, through to doing a bit of writing. Things like book chapters are really nice to be involved in, because it gives you an opportunity to review the literature that's out there. And sometimes you may be asked to author them independently, and other times with a group of people. And it just gives you that time to kind of home in on one subject, and usually quite a niche, narrow subject. So then through to being involved in formal projects, and then the big soft trial that we're doing. So that's where I am. So how do you get started? And I'm trying to keep this really simple for tips for what you can do in day-to-day practice if you're not at that stage where you might want to be considering applying for one of the NIHR pathways, but more just trying to implement it more into your day-to-day practice. Well, after my undergrad dissertation, I did a course many moons ago that was run by a local college at the time I was working in Scotland, called Safe and Effective Practice. And it was a great course that we did over a few months and went for a day now and again. And it talked, for junior clinicians, it talked about how to make sure your practice is safe, but also effective. You know, how do you know what you're doing is the right thing to do? And that was a great starting point as a senior 2, as I was at the time, a senior 2 physio, to start to think, oh, you know what, maybe we could think about how we're doing this, how can we change things? And then assisting and observing senior clinicians with research. There's lots of people that are heavily involved in research that always want somebody to data collect for them. So I had senior clinicians years ago who were doing MPhils or MSCs or PhDs, and they want somebody to collect data, to give questionnaires out to patients, to run protocols through. And it just gives you that insight into how projects work. Attending audit meetings, really simple for those in the NHS. All NHS trusts have audit meetings, not just to listen and think, is that going to change my practice? Because if you listen to, you know, they've always got lots of death rate type audits and things. You know, you might think, well, that doesn't change my practice. But actually, you could think, well, how did they do that study? How did they do that project? How did they take the idea from a grassroots idea in clinical practice and move it through to something else? And then the other thing is to start using PROMs and objective measures consistently, which I'll come to in a while. So as Bill's mentioned, it's all about collaboration. There's no point that I have reached yet that I've sat down and thought, I want to take on the world. I'm going to write my own RCT all on my own and expect to do it all. I'm going to do all the stats myself. I'm going to do everything. I'll do ethics myself. You know, you need a big team with you. There's lots of people out there that are interested in the same things that you are. And it's really good to find those people, because it always is a team effort. And that's the only way you can do it. So I was really fortunate in 2013 to join the Wrightington Upper Limb unit, which is a tremendous unit. We have a brilliant team of academic staff, one of whom is on tonight, and a nice little photo of Katie there. Therapy team and the surgical team. We have clinical fellows who come to do research projects. There's lots of very research-led brains with a lot of experience, and working in that environment has provided me with immense opportunities. Now, sadly, I've had to do a sidestep from Wrightington recently whilst trying to do the juggle of too many things in my life. But I'm still involved in the research trials there. So as Bill was saying, making, you know, that family around you and getting lots of people to help you is key. So building professional networks, you know, make sure you've got them locally, nationally, and you will get, you know, international people. There are people elsewhere, just as Bill said, interested in the same things that you are. There's some great organisations out there, I should say MACP, but also I'm an active member of BESS, the British Elbow and Shoulder Society, who have different committees, research committee, education committee, who have lots of people that want to get involved, that are running projects and need help or want to get involved in projects. And they're great places to go, and you don't need to be a specialist in that area. You know, just dip in. There's lots of things on the BESS website. Social media, I have a love-hate relationship with. One of my Wrightington colleagues once said to me, if you're going to be on social media, you just have to be beige. Don't be too brightly coloured or brightly patterned. Just keep it run-of-the-mill and you'll be safe. I think there is a tendency there, certainly for me, to kind of sit and look and think, oh, I don't, you know, it's throwing me off. I feel it kind of questions my confidence. But then occasionally I will put into debates and things. So yeah, it's a love-hate relationship. So you need to appreciate other people's work. There's lots to be learned from looking at others' work, such as the audit meetings, MDT meetings. So again, NHS departments quite often run an MDT meetings regularly. The Wrightington crew twice a week now online have multidisciplinary meetings with the orthopods, the therapists, microbiology, radiology, to discuss complex cases. And it's during those type of things when questions may come up. So, oh, actually, yeah, we can't get these patients well. Why are we not achieving what we want to achieve with this group of patients? We need to run a project on that. In private practice, in my private practice, we have a private MDT also. So it is possible, even if you're in a lone practice, network with other practices, because the others need to be networking too, and discuss, share those problematic patients, but also share the patients that you've done well with. Look at the presentations, abstract presentations from meetings such as BEST. They're usually published online. It was at some of those meetings that I sat there and thought, oh, actually, I could probably do that. That's not actually that complicated what they've done. They've taken a simple idea and taken it to something else, and I've learned something from it. So maybe I could start to do that. So from watching other people's work, being inspired by them, you can appreciate the complexities and the simplicities of how to run projects, or not even run, be involved in. Excuse me. Sorry, the COVID cough's getting the best of me. So what you want to ask is, how does this affect my practice? Can I do anything differently? Do I get the best outcomes for my patients? Do I achieve good results? And can I share my work with others? So, will other people be interested in what I'm doing? Because it may just be that I need to report what I'm doing to others. Working groups are really, really good for networking, discussing, learning from others, posing questions, chatting with different professions. I've been involved in a lot of working groups nationally and locally. So quite some years ago, probably back 2014, I set up a North West, a special interest group for elbows, because there's not much elbow love out there, and I wanted to share a little bit of the elbow love. And we I believe pre-COVID, it's now called BC, before COVID, in the BC era, we discussed a lot about elbows and tried to find gaps in the literature or gaps in our clinical practice, and spent evenings discussing lots of elbow things. More formal groups, we had a group based in Oxford that the Oxford team set up to look at atraumatic shoulder instability. So that's a group of patients that are very difficult to manage, come with a lot of complex problems. And Jane Moser, who is based at Oxford, set up a group where we met every 6 months and went down and chatted about the patients we were seeing and tried to work out what we knew about that group of patients. Were we even using the right outcome measures? What was there a need for a new outcome measure for them? How were we managing them? What numbers were coming through? And research questions were posed from that group. More recently, I've been involved in some tennis elbow work. Marcus Bateman from Derby is doing a PhD in tennis elbow, and he's done some working groups to determine core outcome measures for tennis elbow. So that there's lots of different varieties, either formal or informal ones, and there's always lots of opportunities to get involved, such as the priority setting partnerships from the James Lind Alliance. If you have a look on their website or online, they're always looking for clinicians to get involved in various ones. There's just been an elbow one recently. So again, it's about getting out there and putting your hand up and saying yes. Excuse me. So PROMs and objective measures. I think the key is to be consistent with the right groups of patients and to use appropriate PROMs. So you need to be clear that you're using the right PROMs for the right patients, and one doesn't fit all. If you use them consistently, you will start to see patterns with your patients. So we introduced a new tennis and golfer's elbow class some years ago, and we set up lots of really good patient outcome measures, subjective outcome measures, and also objective ones, and measured lots of patients pre-class, post-class, during the class, and we collected this massive sheet of data. And it's when you start to get those numbers together for those groups of patients that you realize, they recognize patterns, or just start to see patterns that will then pose questions. Oh, well, actually, if you look, this changes here and here, and that's never been noticed before or reported in the literature. So maybe that's something that we could influence patient outcomes with. Can we make them better if we change or intervene here? But if you're using the wrong outcome measure, if you're treating frozen shoulders and not measuring range of movement and just concentrating, or or stiffness is the main problem, and you're doing a VAS for pain, you're not going to get the data that you want. And understand the specificity and the sensitivity. So we in shoulder and elbow like quick dashes clinically. So it's good to know how sensitive that outcome questionnaire is. If you're just seeing a 1-point change with patients, that's not going to really tell you anything. So you need to know how many points it's actually clinically significant. But have the confidence to ask. It's really hard to learn all of that or to get these snippets from a textbook or anything. So you just go and talk to people that use them day in, day out, that you implement them into research, because they have the answers and they're really happy to share the knowledge with you. This is something that Bill could probably explain more, but for those that don't know and aren't involved in research, the Good Clinical Practice Certificate, GCP, is the essential starting point. And this is taken from the NHR website today. It's the international ethical and scientific practical standard to which all clinical research is conducted, and it protects the safety and well-being. So it teaches you the kind of standards that are expected in research. Who's responsible for reporting adverse events, who's responsible for reporting any data to anyone, etc. And it's something that you do online every couple of years to make sure you maintain that. And without having completed the certificate, you can't be involved in clinical research, is my understanding. So it doesn't have to be complicated. Keep it simple, and simplest of things are often the most useful and interesting. What I wanted to do is chat through a thought process that I've been undergone. Apologies if you can hear a child screaming and shouting, having an argument. A thought process that I've gone through over the past probably 5 years and is still ongoing, of how a simple kind of clinical idea turned into a more interesting project. And actually, as of last week, somebody's contacted me to ask if they can do multi-centre RCT with this project involved. So this is my head working. Right, so background, I'm going into elbows now, I could talk all day. Elbow stiffness is a well-documented complication of elbow trauma. And we know that loss of range of movement at the elbow can lead to poor function, simples. And the elbow gets more stiff than any other joint in the body. Now, excuse me, for what's worth saying for those of you that may not be familiar with elbows, in the UK, there's quite a varied practice with elbow trauma as to whether or not people are mobilised, immobilised post-trauma. In some countries, such as Germany, they immobilise everybody after elbow trauma and then tell the patients, you will need another operation down the line to arthralise your elbow to get it moving. But then that's 2 operations, not 1. So really, we need to reduce the need for an arthrolysis. So notice this is a problem with patients. We all know it's a problem. So where do you start? Well, you have a look at the literature and just see what is out there. I'm asking myself the question, am I doing what I think is the best for my patients? Is there anybody that's doing anything different with them to make them less stiff? Talk to colleagues locally, nationally, internationally. And really notice, it's not just about one paper, it's for looking for patterns in the literature. Chat to the orthopods, again, they're really good at research, way better than well, definitely than I am. So when you're looking at that literature, just for those that maybe aren't as familiar with reading literature, key things, my top tips, keeping it really simple here. Patient cohort inclusion criteria, the big key ones. You can't have a study on frozen shoulder whose patient group was aged 18 to 30 because they don't get frozen shoulder. Look at the author group, a bit like Bill was saying, who wrote it, who was involved, which institution, are they generally reliable publishers, do they produce good research, and where was it published? Is it controversial? Is it the norm, or is this something that's just really wacky out there that's been picked out of nowhere? So once I started having a bit of a search, I came across some really interesting stuff in my elbow geeky way, and basically discovered that the neurophysiologists and the physiologists have been on this for ages, for years, way back in 1972 for the Goodwin crew, but the orthopods and the physio crew hadn't actually crossed journals. We hadn't ventured into that end of the library. So what we discovered was that limited capsular mechanoreceptors and articular proprioception exists at the elbow. I won't go into this in details, I could talk all night. We proprioceptively drift into flexion, it's usually extension that's the problem. We have limited high level processing at the elbow compared to the elbow, wrist, shoulder, wrist and hand. And when we may rely on muscle spindles for proprioception, those muscles go over generally 2 joints. So basically the elbow has got rubbish proprioception. It's proprioceptively deficient compared to the shoulder, wrist and hand. So the question is, do the patients actually even realise that they're getting stiff? Because what I'd noticed in clinical practice, so I'm reading this and thinking, yeah, that makes sense. Because if you ask a patient to flex their elbow, they do this, get your hand to your mouth, and when it doesn't move, chin comes forward, hand bends. And if you ask them to extend it, they do that. So when you think they're doing the nice table slides, moving their elbows, they're just doing this with their shoulder and then they get a sore shoulder. So I think you get the compensatory patterns because you haven't got the proprioception. Interesting. So how do we do, well, how do we make that better in clinical practice? How can I improve that proprioception for this group of patients? Well, we can enhance the afferent inputs by using multi-joint movements, active movements, bilateral activities to get a crossover effect on the motor cortex, and kinetic chain recruitment. Easy. Then they'll get the better proprioception, they'll notice they're compensating, and then the elbow moves. Wonderful. So in rehab, we add tube grip, visual feedback, get the hand leading, goal driven, kinetic change, but not forgetting stability and fracture and soft tissue healing. We put all that into a nice post-op protocol. So we start with range of movement and control, moving to stability, start with the overhead short lever, long lever, weight bearing. Easy. So then we think, okay, right, so we've got a brilliant protocol that we think is going to work for patients and reduces elbow stiffness. How can we actually report that? So we wrote a nice little project up called Postoperative Physiotherapy Protocol to Reduce Elbow Stiffness. Now here's me and my elbow friends, because I can't do the stats and I'm no Professor Whiz. So I have Professor here, Adam Watts, and another genius here, Andy Duckworth, who's an elbow surgeon in Edinburgh and an amazing whiz with stats. So they're my friends in the know. So our purpose was to establish a physiotherapy post-operative protocol to reduce elbow stiffness and create an efficient pathway to physiotherapy, because often they'd wait 3 weeks for physio after their op, which was no good. So we all sit together and think, how are we going to do this? What's the best method? So we identified a group from a treating surgeons database, and we did a retrospective analysis of 2 groups, a pre and post introduction of a rehab protocol. And we looked at the number of days to the outpatient appointment, and then the range of movement, flexion, extension, and the total arc. So from extension into flexion, measured with a goniometer on discharge, and then pro and supination estimated at site. Easy, simples. And then Andy, stats guy, does nice little graphs. So I can't do this, but I can talk about them. Team effort all round. So interestingly, what we found was, if we look at the extension here, can you see my mouse thingy? Yeah. So in the pre-protocol group, we're 23 degrees compared to 11 degrees, so heading towards 0. And I haven't got the numbers on here. The difference wasn't as big in flexion, but in the total arc of motion, we changed from 107 to 128. And in elbows, we talk about 130 as the functional range with 100 minimum. So that was really good, because we were achieving that functional range for all the patients, well, most of the patients. Now, what's more interesting about this, these little lines here indicate the range of scores. So what we actually achieved in the protocol was more consistent results, because we've got a much shorter range on all of the red bars. So whereas before the protocol, we had some patients that did well, some that did really, really bad, needing an arthrolysis, for example, at a later date. But once we introduced protocol, we got much more consistency with the results, which is great, because we know that we should be getting better results for a greater number of patients. So we concluded, we can't conclude much, we've got massive limitations here, but we concluded the implementation of a post-op physiotherapy protocol following ORIF of the elbow resulted in increased range of movement and a more efficient physio pathway, which we managed to bring the days down to 7 days-ish. And we presented that as an abstract at the BEST meeting in 2018. So this was a really simple idea, a really simple study. It's not proper research. We're just writing up a project, a service development that we've done. So we've got huge limitations, but it's a great starting point, and it opens more questions. You know, which bit of the protocols made the difference? That's something we're trying to decide now. It's leading to more research. It's given us quite a lot of ideas. And another research group that have come to me recently and said, actually, can we use this protocol? We think we should run it through an RCT, a multi-centre RCT, which is great. And this is a project I get asked about so much, but it's really, really simple. So moving into a more formal, proper research project, the City trial is a comparison of injection techniques for tennis elbow. So we're currently recruiting for this. Adam, Professor Watts is the lead investigator for this. It's based at Wrightington and is funded by industry. So we have 3 arms for injections: hyalurons, PRP and a sham injection. So they're all having blood sample taken as if they were having PRP, but they're having their syringes covered so they don't know what which injection they've had. After the injection, they're all having the same physio protocol, which is based on our tennis elbow class that we'd done as a service development project some time before that we collected the data from. So I've been involved in the trial design and protocol. I don't do the funding and ethics, that's Adam's job. The implementation and then recruitment in clinic and ongoing management of this trial. So that's ongoing as we speak. And then we come to the big trial that we've got underway at the moment. So the soft trial has been funded by NIHR, for which we are very grateful. And I was a co-applicant for the funding. It's a suture fixation versus tension band wiring for simple olecranon fracture fixation, a multi-centre randomised controlled trial. So the background to this is in an olecranon fracture, which I'm sure many of you have treated patients from, you manage with tension band wiring. But the problem with that for many patients is that when they're leaning on their elbow, the wires are very prominent under the skin and they can't weight bear on elbows. So at a later date, the patients usually request the wires to be removed. But that's another operation which has cost implications to both the patient and the NHS, also days away from work, further risk of infection, anaesthetic, etc. So a group of surgeons developed a suture fixation technique that uses literally suture material rather than the wires, and they repair it with sutures in a figure of 8. And what's been noticed is, as they've implemented this into their practice, that the patients that are managed in this way don't tend to need these second operations, and they have good results. They don't seem to have the non-unions, etc. So it's not common practice, that technique, because surgeons, until they've been taught it, wouldn't necessarily entertain it. And there obviously is, some people stick with what they know, understandably, because if they get good results with that, then why change? So the trial is funding the NHR funding a multi-centre trial. So we have a trial, we have Adam as the principal investigator, we have a trial management team at the University of York who are paid researchers and statistician, trial management, trial admin, who run the trial and manage all the centres day to day. We have the team of co-applicants, I'm one of them, who are a range of orthopaedic surgeons. I'm the only AHP on there. We have a patient on there who's a member of a public and patient involvement group. And then we have an ongoing management team, which is a slightly bigger team than the co-applicant team. So we have even more expertise. Many of the management team and the co-applicants have been through NHR large funded trials before. There's some amazingly inspirational people on there. So I've been involved in the application process, excuse me, the trial protocol. I've written an information leaflet for the patients with physiotherapy guidance for after the procedure. We can't control the physiotherapy because it is a pragmatic trial. I was involved in the PPI consultation, which was brilliant. We met with lots of groups of patients, a specific group of patients on several occasions, talked to them about what their thoughts would be, how would they feel if they were in the trial, would they prefer one technique rather than the other in the way that we've sold it to them? And what would their concerns be about being part of the trial? The PPI groups are really fascinating to be involved in if you ever get the opportunity or get the opportunity, you know, put yourself out there and ask if you can go along to one. We then entered a pilot phase, and we've just come out of that. So it's now about ongoing management. We were meeting every month, but we've gone to 3 monthly management meetings online to discuss the trial, how it's going, have we had any adverse events, any reportable incidents, are we managing to get the target for recruitment? You know, COVID struck in the middle just as we were starting to recruit. But for us, luckily, not for the patients, you know, it's a trauma trial. So we still, sadly, for the patients, had broken elbows. And now it's that ongoing management, and it has been a really fascinating journey. So as of last week or so, we had 40 sites open for recruitment, so 40 different surgeons, different trusts involved, and their research departments report back to the team at York. We have 4 sites set up that should open soon, and we've had 146 participants randomised. So we're making really good progress. My other big role is that I'm the one of the 2, along with Katie, who I'll mention again, who's on this evening, measurers for the range of movement for the outcome. So we have a set protocol for patients, how they photograph their arm, which is taken from another study, and we're going to do the measurements online for the range of movement outcome. It's been a massive eye-opener, a massive journey. It's a huge team effort, and there's so much to learn. I sit in the management meetings virtually in awe of the inspirational people, the professors that are just so wise in everything that they say and know. The key is that not knowing everything is okay, and it's normal, and even the heroes and my heroes that are in the meetings don't know everything, but there is always a role that you can perform perfectly, and there's always things to learn and always those to learn from also. I just wanted to say a quick thing about imposter syndrome. I think it's really commonplace in AHPs, and it's, for those not aware, it's an ability to believe that your success is deserved or legitimately achieved. So prime example, I get the invite to come and talk to I'm not a proper researcher, I can't do a talk like that. You know, it's really easy to say no and just go, oh, no, I'll let somebody else do it. I don't think I'm good enough for that. But just to be aware that everybody, you know, lots of people suffer from it. And I think the day that you forget to question whether or not you know something is probably a bad day anyway. So don't let it hold you back. So going back to my journey, where am I going to now? I'm nearly written up our project on the range of increasing the range of movement, and then we're hoping to submit that publishing. I've got another RCT in the early planning stage at the moment that one of the fellows at Brightington is taking the lead on and is applying for funding. And then again, various other projects and who knows. So you need to get involved, put yourself out there, write some book chapters. They're good fun. There's always people looking for those to be involved in that. Phone a friend, speak to them, be involved in a society. We've got the North West Upper Limb group, which is a mixture of AHPs and surgeons. Bess is brilliant, and hot off the press, this is as of about 3 o'clock this afternoon. I did check I was allowed to share with you. Bess have education committee have just developed a new scheme for people who are non-specialists in shoulder and elbow. So early career, or those who feel that at some point they may want to be properly invested into shoulder and elbow but not quite sure, those looking to get involved in projects, research studies. On the Best website, we have a new Best Trainees tab where you can register your interest. There's no charge at all, and you don't have to be a member. It's there to try and get people involved in shoulder and elbow at an early age, you know, an early career, and to support them into their specialist journey if that's where they want to go. The other thing that's really good to do is to review articles. I review for Shoulder and Elbow Journal, and reading other people's studies provides a really amazing insight into it's different, very different to reading an article and critiquing it, thinking about implementing it into practice. You're deciding whether or not it can be published in a journal, so you are kind of pulling it apart a little bit, but you do have to take a step back and think, oh, actually it's a really hard study to run this, they have done a really, really good job. So the journals are always looking for reviewers too, so there's loads of opportunities, and you don't need to be extra special or fancy or have done any formal research pathways to do that. I'm proof. So get out there and put your hand up and say yes. Thanks for that. If you want to reach out to me, feel free to drop me an email or anything, and I'll try and point you in the right direction. Thank you.
That was fantastic, Jill. Thank you so much. And I think in terms of both yourself and Bill's presentations, it was really good to hear your journey, because it feels achievable. It feels realistic that research can be and is part of all of our clinical careers, and that they're the stepping stones, I suppose, to the programs that Bill was talking about. And there were certainly two themes that really stood out for both of your presentations. One being networking is really the essential in terms of your success as a clinical researcher. And I suppose, asking and involving yourself as much as you can seems to be kind of one of the key messages that you're both shared with us tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I did have that. There aren't a huge number of questions, but I did have one, which I think is a challenge for me, and is probably a challenge for everybody that's here tonight, with the pressures in terms of seeing patients and our priority and our clinical roles being face-to-face patient contact. How would you advise navigating research activity with management teams who have perhaps different priorities and perhaps aren't I suppose as aware of the benefits of us all being involved in research activity and the long-term kind of improvements that can have on our patient outcomes and the care we provide?
It's a really good question. I appreciate that at somewhere like Wrightington as an NHS unit, it's a kind of a little bubble that's where it was set up as somewhere that developed, going back to its history of developing the first joint replacement in the world. Everybody wants to carry on that ethos, so it is different. I think it is hard, and there's a lot of pressures, and certainly over the past couple of years, even more pressures on NHS teams. But I think there's always positive things to come out of it, and it's how you sell it to anybody. And I mean, myself and my colleague Julia Walton always say that we're the used car salesman of the healthcare world. When we take on a patient, we have to sell something to somebody to want to get them engaged with us. And it's the same going to your managers. Why should they want to invest in it with you? What's in it for them? So you've got to work out what is in it for them. Because if you look at a few projects that I've mentioned there, such as the stiff elbows, reducing stiffness, we've managed to reduce how many times the patients are seen. We've managed to make it a more efficient pathway in. So we've actually improved the service and saved appointments in the process. The same with the elbow groups that we set up. We saved a lot of patient appointments with those, but actually got better outcomes for the patients too. So you have got to think of it from the trust perspective, and as a manager you've got to think, well, what is in it for them? And I think it's how you sell it. Yeah, and again, a bit like Bill said as well, you've got to do something that is worthwhile rather than just something that takes your interest. Yeah,
and I think and I'd add to Jill's comment there, just where you can, give yourself time, plan it, and plan the conversations. Because the last thing the managers will want is a fait accompli, say this starts on Monday and I want to do it. But if there's an opportunity down the line that will be of benefit to the trust, you're far more likely to receive support for that. And if you think of there are other sorts of provisions around that can help the trusts by providing buyout for your time. The pre-masters internship that NHS R&D North West are running, funded by Health Education England, That's going to start in April. For this round, it's now applications have now closed, but they're funding people to get 30 days of buyout from their clinical roles to dip their toes into the research world. For people who, you know, are curious about research but haven't done a great deal but have some vision. But in that application process, they're told, they're asked, have you got support from your employing organisation, and what form does that take? Because it needs to be a commitment to you because of your commitment to them. So, you know, plan it and plan the journey really, and it'll be far less painful if your managers are on board. If you ask the very senior managers in the trust, is research important here? They say, of course it is. Every trust you go to. When you go down and down and down, then the people who are faced with the day-to-day pressures of practice, it becomes, you know, potentially a burden for them. But and offer something back. We would always say, run journal clubs, you know, more junior colleagues if you can, depending upon where you are in your own research career. But there's also an element of you have to go the extra mile. Jill will have done this. Some of it is in your own time. You know, it's not all going to be provided, and sometimes they see that as being, well, that's a measure of commitment. That you're prepared to do that. So, I mean, I think people that are on the webinar tonight have done it by coming onto the webinar. They're going the extra mile, doing it in a way. They're just doing that, which is wonderful.
And they're hugely appreciative. There's some lovely comments. Thank you. This is quite inspirational. Another, it's been really helpful and inspiring. So thank you both so much for giving up your precious time. It's been really informative. I know I've certainly taken a lot from it, and it sounds like everybody else has as well. So thank you. If there's any last comments, or are you guys okay to wrap it up?
I would just say, Jill's comment there of the illustration of the journey. Start small, get involved in whatever way you can, and it will grow just by happenstance, just by, you know, by chance. It's wonderful, and it's a powerful message from the visual that Jill's provided there. It's great.
Yeah, it was a perfect research journey to share. So thanks, Jill. And just for the MACP members that are on tonight, it's just a bit of a reminder that the MACP does offer research awards of different monetary values, and the details of those research awards and the application process are on the MACP website, and I believe they're quite an underutilized resource. So this is one of those funding opportunities that Bill was talking about that we have got access to tap into. So it's just being mindful that that is there for us. And also, if you could share your feedback through the Eventbrite link that will be sent to you, or you can email me directly, that'd be really good. You know, I can feed it back to Bill and Jill, but also it'll just help us shape further educational evenings in the future. So thank you so much to all of you for attending, and thank you, David, for helping me with the organisation of this over the last few months.
You're welcome, and I think again, I would just echo Charlotte's thanks really on behalf of MACP, and you know, a really interesting topic, and two really interesting views of that. So yeah, we really appreciate that. Thanks again. It's really good to see the feedback as well. So in terms of people in the room, there will be an automatic email that will come to you with a very short Google form link in terms of feedback. It'll take less than 2 minutes. It's 5 questions only, and as Charlotte says, we can use that to shape not just Northwest events, but potentially those of wider reach. So if you would take the time, those who've attended, to do that, I would really appreciate that as well. So yeah, unless there's any more questions, I guess we can let everyone go and
Yeah,
you know, get ready for bed.
get back to
the clinics tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Jill and Bill. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks everyone.